This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios Podcast Network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Thank you to all my patrons for supporting the podcast. If you too would like an ad-free experience of the podcast, support the podcast at any level on patreon.com/gracefulatheist. If you are in the middle of doubts, deconstruction, the dark night of the soul, you do not have to do it alone. Join our private Facebook group, Deconversion Anonymous, and become a part of the community. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. My guest today is Christian Lomsdalen. Christian is the president of the Norwegian Humanist Association. It's one of the largest humanist associations in the world. You can find that at human.no. He's also a PhD candidate for the University of Bergen. He studies the didactics or science of religion, and he's very, very focused on human rights and what you're about to hear, very interestingly, the rights of religious people within Norwegian and worldwide society. Here is Christian Lomsdalen to tell his story. Christian Lomsdalen, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for having me on.
I appreciate you reaching out to me. I'm going to do just some highlights of your CV, but if you could fill in the details. You're the president of the Norwegian Humanist Association. You're a PhD candidate. I understand you're also a high school teacher, but tell us just briefly about yourself, what you do, and we'll get into the details later.
Well, thank you, David. For my, paid part of my life, I work as a PhD candidate.
Okay.
For the University of Bergen, which is the second largest university in Norway. Here I study the didactics of religion or science of religion. It could be used both terms for this.
Okay, yeah.
And I do a PhD on the right to be exempted on religious, philosophical, or life stance grounds from activities that are part of the school day. So that is what I do for my professional life.
We need to publicize that here in the States, as you can imagine. So, yes, okay.
I'm trying now to write an article in English about how this right works in the Scandinavian countries. So I'm looking forward to completing that and having something to publish in English as well.
Okay, yeah, we will be looking forward to that.
And as you said, I'm the president of the Norwegian Humanist Association. We are the largest humanist association in the world, with now 135,000 members.
Amazing.
So that is the largest per capita and in real numbers. So
okay.
That is, it's something that I take a little pride in. It's good to be able to be from what is a rather small country, but be a large organization in this aspect, and to contribute to other people, other countries, groups, humanist groups. So that is nice.
No, I think that's absolutely amazing, and Norway is leading the way here. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. Christian, we, on the podcast here, we generally tell kind of our personal stories. So before we jump into all the work that you do, I'd really like to hear, what was it like for you growing up? Did you have a religious tradition at all? And what was that?
I grew up in what is the kind of normal way to grow up in Norway.
Okay.
Or at least it was with my generation. It has been a shift for a new generation. So I will be talking maybe more about that later on. But for me, I grew up in what we call a Christmas Christian family.
Okay. Yeah.
A family that goes to church in Christmas and does not do very much religion outside of that. But at the same time, I felt that was how my religion growing up was. And this is a Lutheran church, of course, for those who need to know my placement in the church map. But we prayed evening prayers every day. We celebrated most of the Christian holidays and so on. So to say that we were just Christmas Christians is probably a lie, but it's how I perceived it at the time. But when reflecting on this, I noticed that we did actually participate a lot in different Christian aspects when I grew up. So I took, for example, the confirmation. I'm not sure if that is a big tradition in the United States.
It is more so in the Catholic Church and some of the more liturgical churches. There might be more confirmation experience. It's less so in the evangelical world, but I think people understand the concept.
I like the term liturgical
Yes,
churches.
yes,
That is a term I like.
yes, yes.
Because the Norwegian state church, or former state church, we can discuss whether which one is true.
Okay.
But in the Norwegian state church, it's quite liturgical,
Hmm.
and the main church political party in the Norwegian state church is very liturgical. So that is
It's a good
a
word.
point
All
of
right.
view. Yeah. So here we have confirmations, and most of the teenagers do this. So when I participated in my confirmations, I was living in Spain, but going to the Norwegian church in Spain.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Okay.
and well, I participated. I identified as a Christian during this time, and being one of the more active Christians that took this confirmation, a lot of the my co-confirmants, they did not care a lot about the religious part of this, but I read the Bible, tried to read it, and it was one of the things that I read when I was bored. I read the Bible.
Interesting. Okay.
I had the encyclopedia and I had the Bible, and I read them both like through and through a couple of times just because I was bored.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
So I identified as a Christian at this time, and that was how I viewed the world. A quite liberal Christian, probably. I guess a lot of the evangelicals in the United States probably wouldn't recognize me as a Christian.
Yeah.
Uh,
They'd be sending you to hell, Christians. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Some of the Norwegian ones as well.
Okay. But
But
you took it relatively seriously by, again, even the statement that, you read through the Bible, you took that seriously, and maybe your other confirmants had not. That would also be very true in the United States, that lots of people who sit in pews every week have never actually read the Bible. So was it internally something you took on seriously, or was it more following the traditions?
on this part, I guess I was more active than a lot of my family, so I guess it was internalized in
Okay.
many ways. And I think it's unfortunate that more people that grow up in a Christian background does not read the Bible, and
Hmm.
because it's quite an interesting book to read,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
doing the time reading it and reflecting on some of the topics. But I realized after a time that I really like the stories. I still have favorite Bible stories, and I like a lot of the message in some ways still. But I realized that I did not believe in the concept of God as portrayed. I didn't believe in the entity of this God existence, and then I realized that I had a quite academic point of on how to view this religion, and realized that I'm not here. I'm an agnostic or atheist.
Okay. And roughly how old were you when you kind of made that recognition?
I guess I was 17. I wanted to leave the Norwegian state church when I was 15 already, but that was a political statement because I didn't believe in churches to be belonging to the state.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was
Yeah.
opposed to this belonging, but still identifying as a Christian, and then realizing that I'm not a Christian when I was 17 or 18. It was a fluid transition or deconstruction.
Yes. Yeah. The hot word is deconstruction. Sure.
But I guess it's a nice word because I think it reflects upon the process that I was going through at the time. slowly and gradually, but it was, yeah. Some of the interviews that you had is with quite rapid deconstructions.
Sometimes, yes.
This was a slow deconstruction.
Yeah. I like to say that we tend to identify the first thing and the last thing, what started it and what ended it, but there's 1,000 points in between. And I definitely have lots of people who will say that it was decades, of that process. So you're not alone in that for some people it's a very slow process. So you've hinted at a few times the relationship between the church and state in Norway. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, whether or not it is considered the state church?
Yes, actually really want that because that is interesting for me.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And the Norwegian church has been a part of the Norwegian government or the Norwegian state for almost 500 years, since
Hmm.
the year 1539 or thereabouts.
Okay, yeah.
So they claim a very long history as being a part of the Norwegian government. And so it has been established as the state church very firmly. And the confirmation that I was talking about earlier was a by law obligatory ceremony to participate in for all youth. And it was an exam that you had to pass to become a grown up.
Interesting. Okay.
And if you didn't pass this test, you could actually go to jail. And you
Wow.
were not allowed to marry or become part of the military, and a lot of, so it was very tightly joined together. And the
Hmm.
Norwegian church was not its own legal person until quite recently, only 5-6 years ago.
Okay. Wow. That's really recent. Okay.
Yeah. So, and the government was the one that hired new bishops and decided who should be the bishops, and it was very tightly joined together. But we
Okay.
had a reform about 15 years ago, which in it was decided that it should be more separation between state and church.
Okay.
And in this process, in this reform, the Norwegian government decided that the church should do the hiring themselves.
Yeah.
I think that is a basic human right for a religious organization to decide upon their own leaders. And it was decided that it should be its own legal entity and that it should be more disconnected from the Norwegian state. But at the same time, they have kept its own provisions in the constitution, in the Norwegian constitution. And the Norwegian constitution works differently than the American one. We actually changed the text of the original constitution. We does not just add amendments to it, so we changed the text.
Okay.
Uh, but we still have these provisions in the constitution that gives certain rights to the Norwegian church, or the Church of Norway, as it's called.
Okay.
That is not the same for the other churches or life stands communities and so on and so forth. But it does say that all the rest of us also should get support financially in the same manner as the Norwegian state church. So we are also, for some part, included in this.
Okay.
But they say, the politicians claim that they have separated church and state, and at the same time they have their own. The Norwegian church has its own provisions in law, in the constitution, that, for my part, it says that this is a state church, really, still, but a more disconnected state church.
I see. Okay. My immediate question is, are most of the Norwegian politicians a part of the Norwegian church? And are they open about that? Is that a thing that they represent, or
As you mean, compared to the American
yes.
parliament,
Yes.
where 9 out of 10 is a member of a church or a believer.
Yeah.
No, we do not actually know a lot of this, but because they do not have to report it, and the the newspaper doesn't ask the politicians, "Are you a Christian?" or no. So um, it's not something that is considered important, and it's considered quite private. But we see that a lot of members of parliament are also members of church boards and so on. So we know that at least some of them are.
Okay.
And
There's some crossover. Yeah.
some crossover. But it's mostly tradition. We have a couple of political parties which values the state church quite highly. And for some of them, it's because we want to control this Norwegian state church and we want to make it progressive or something.
Okay.
And for others, it's to defend tradition. And some use more Christian rhetoric about why they want to have this church that is the biggest one and give it its own provisions in law and so on.
So this sounds to me like both on the liberal end of the spectrum and on the conservative end, there are politicians who might want to have that control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is a quite good reading of what I said.
Okay. Like you, when I was a Christian, I was very concerned about separation of church and state. I felt like it was important both for the church and for the state. I'm curious, both when you were a Christian and now as a humanist, why is it bad that the church and state are connected to one another?
I think my arguments about this has changed from when I was a Christian, and but at the same time it's quite similar because my experience is that religion is not something that the state should do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's not a task for the state, and to give preferential treatment to one religion is principally wrong, and it might be good reasons why they want to have this regulation or control over the state church, and there's absolutely good reasons why someone would like to do that. But I think that is also wrong to the state church. I think this reduces their fundamental human rights as believers, as Christians, that the Norwegian government has some specific decisions that is just for them. And this might be beneficial for them, and it might give them some uh, possibilities that they wouldn't have and responsibilities that they wouldn't otherwise have. But at the same time, it does say that if the Norwegian church wants to be undemocratic, because that is one of the tenets in the law, that they have to be democratic and that they have to be nationwide, they cannot decide that they want to be a smaller organization with more limited scope, and that they want to have, for example, the bishops to be the final word on everything. They cannot do all this like theologically based changes to their organization that all other life stance communities, all other philosophical communities, all other religious communities can do to their organizations. So I think this is a limitation on their religious rights.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Which I humor myself with this argument sometimes because I find it kind of funny that I, as a humanist, am concerned that the Norwegian state church members do not have their full religious rights, and that,
Mm-hmm.
and we can discuss the term religious rights as well.
Yeah, let's get into that in a second. The parallel I want to make in the United States is I have this conversation with the believers around me all the time. Imagine I don't know how it is in Norway, but in the United States, there are many, many denominations that can be quite radically different from one another. And I'll point out, if this denomination that you don't agree with, if they gained political power, how would you feel if they began to say that your version of Christianity isn't valid and could enforce that with law or police or what have you? You wouldn't like that. And so that is thus the need for secularism or pluralism and for the state to not have its fingers in religion.
And that is quite important. But at the same time, the Norwegian system is built in such a way that the church, even though it's a state church, they do not sanction what is the correct form of religion. So we wouldn't have some of this. But at the same time, the Norwegian state definition of what is a religion and what is a religious communities and who to gain support from the Norwegian state is quite Lutheran.
Okay. Okay.
So
Yes.
this means that, for example, the vegan society,
Hmm.
even though they have been declared a life stance, veganism is a life stance, and we see the same in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
They cannot, they haven't been able to create the Norwegian vegan society life stance community because they do not do life stance activities.
Interesting. All right.
Because that is supposed to be ceremonies and teaching of the young and spreading the word and all of these things, and they do not do it in the proper Lutheran way, and and thus the Norwegian state church's way of doing things becomes the norm and recipe for all the others.
So back to a bit about religious rights. I imagine you're recognizing that this is kind of a human right as well, the ability for us to choose what we believe or don't believe and how we practice that religion. And if we look at history, that has been kind of a big deal.
Absolutely, and especially with the history of the United States in mind, this is a difficult subject, and it shows how important this is.
Hmm.
And absolutely, this is a human rights issue. And when I'm saying religious rights, I'm limiting the aspect of the human rights to just those that are related to a religion and life stance. And that is also a shorthand for saying that life stance and philosophical convictions also is a part of the same grouping. And I have some members of my organization that are quite annoyed with me for not always using life stance instead of religion when I'm talking about this, because that could make it easier to remind the politicians that this is regarding all worldviews, both secular and religious.
The language is hard when we're discussing traditions and communities and things that don't necessarily have a, let's say, theistic or supernatural element to them, but they have. And I think you're gonna describe to us what the humanist society is like, that have ceremonies and have a community built and a sense of being a group. And so, yeah, it's hard to say, is this a religion or not? That word is just overwrought with with baggage.
Yes, and this is especially troublesome or telling that the religious scientists or the scientists that do science of religion
Hmm.
have a lot of definitions for what a religion is and what a life stance is.
Yeah.
And they do not agree upon that. So, in some regards, we could argue that a secular worldview would also fit the same bill, but those I don't think those definitions is the best ones.
Okay.
But as a life stance community, the Norwegian Humanist Association, we work a lot with ceremonies. That is the
Hmm.
biggest part of our daily work. My son is now going to the humanist confirmations.
Hmm.
Oh, and that is because he's 15, and almost all teenagers at the age of 15 in Norway go to these confirmations.
Okay.
It has changed a lot. It doesn't involve a test, and it's not state obligatory anymore, and it's
Okay.
and you can choose a religious one or a secular one, even a lot of them. We even have a shamanistic confirmations some places. But the Norwegian Humanist Association has the biggest non-Christian, non-religious confirmation variant in Norway. So we uh, make the confirmations for about a third of the Norwegian youth.
Okay. Wow.
So it's a lot of teenagers, or it's 15,000 to give you the number. So it's a very small American town.
But it sounds like culturally that Norwegians want that ceremony, that's been a part of the process, whether it used to be religious and now is secular. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. And this is a tradition that is quite solid in the Norwegian societal framework. It's something that everyone does. And we have argued sometimes that one of the reasons that the church still has so big portion of the teenagers doing their confirmation work is that we have provided a good alternative for those who does not want the religious experience. And that means that it still is something that everyone does, even though the numbers of believers in the Norwegian community has gone from about 60-70% when I was born till about a third of the population at the moment.
Wow. Okay.
So even though the number of believers, and this is especially true in the youngest parts of the population because it's an age divide here, as in the United States.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Even though this number of believers among these teenagers is so low, a lot of them still go to the Christian confirmation because this is something that historically one just do.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
uh, So we have these ceremonies, and we have naming ceremonies or welcome to the world ceremonies. We could use different names, and of course funerals and weddings.
Oh, very
So,
nice.
so at the moment, I have been trained as a wedding celebrant, and
Okay.
I'm going to be trained as a funeral celebrant this fall.
Okay.
But I have already done my first funeral.
Ah, interesting.
That was a televised funeral.
Really? Oh, wow. Okay. I think that's so important, Christian. I think some of my intellectual heroes in the secular world talk about the need for ceremony and tradition and to have secular versions of those. And I think that is maybe part of the success of the humanist organization in Norway is that you are providing those, you're giving them a way to act out their life stance. And I think that's really, really critical.
And that I really do like the name of your podcast, David.
Ah, thank
The,
you.
the graceful atheist, and for me, some part of this is the part of doing these ceremonies and doing all of this like communal work that is part of this, because rituals and ceremonies are truly one of the glues of society.
Yes.
And we all humans do uh, all kinds of small rituals. If it's the coffee in the morning that I bring to my wife every day,
Yeah. Yeah.
or it's every Saturday we have pizza when we are having the family dinner, or
Hmm.
uh, every summer we go to this place somewhere and we have always been going there. All of these small rituals, and then we have the large rituals, for example the 4th of July in America, or the 17th of May, which is the national day in Norway, the
Okay. Yeah.
constitutional day in Norway. um, and this is part of the glue of society, and it's really important to have this, even though one is an atheist and shouldn't really need these kind of illogical things.
Yeah, and I think the argument that we try to make here is that these are human needs. The reason that there are religious examples in almost all cultures is that human beings need that connection with one another, and tradition and ceremony and ritual provide a way to literally physically act that out that is meaningful for human beings.
It is, and to do this, like these four ceremonies, that is the core of our ceremonies. It's so important to have a proper send off for the, or goodbye to the ones that have died. And what really makes me sad is when there's no one left to do this ceremony and to remember the life of somebody, because when one does not have a life after this one, or believe in life after
Right,
this
right.
one,
Yeah.
it's really necessary to remind ourselves of the importance of this human being that we do not have with us anymore, and to
Mhm.
remember them and all the good things they did and all the less fortunate things they did.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that is important to me and for our organizations.
Wonderful. I want to ask you a wide open question, and we can go any direction you want with this. The term humanism, I think people experience that in different ways, right? For some, it's very academic. It's maybe even anti-religious. For some, it is more about connection with people. I'm curious for you personally, Christian, and then for Norwegians, what does humanism mean?
And you are quite right. It's a quite a difficult word, David, to establish what it is, because on the one hand, it is both academic term. I'm a humanist in my study in work, because the religious science is placed within the humanities.
Yeah.
So that means I'm a humanist. In Norwegian history, as well as in the European history, the humanism we talk about in history is the more or less the Christian humanists, the evolvement of the Christian humanism, and this had a quite big place in Norwegian history. It was established as an important and existing framework. So, when the Norwegian Humanist Association was established in 1956, they chose to use the word human ethicists,
Okay.
or the Humanist and Ethical Union, I think is the word in best translation in American, which meant that separated it from the Christian humanist term, and established its own term that we could fill with what we needed it to be filled with, which was a secular humanism.
Okay.
But at the same time, this has evolved a lot in the Norwegian context, so that now we more frequently uses the term humanism when we are talking about humanism as a term. And some of the strongest proponents of the Christian humanism are quite angry with us for using their words as a way to talk about our thing.
Yes.
And they
Yes.
feel that this is quite different things, even though they are quite similar, although their origin word, the reasons for the world to be and the origins of everything is quite different in these
Hmm.
two aspects. So on our Facebook page, the most contested posts are the one where we write humanism and write about our form of humanism, and a lot of people are writing on the Facebook pages and commenting that this is not humanism. I'm a Christian humanist, and this is why use this word. I'm not a humanist ethicist. I'm a humanist, the real thing. Do not monopolize our word.
Interesting. Interesting. So you're studying religion. So I'm curious, when I talk to the equivalent of what you just described, maybe Christian humanists, although they probably wouldn't use that terminology in the States, but they want to say that humanism is stealing from Christianity, a moral framework, ethical framework, what have you. From a studying of religion point of view, is that true? Do you think that humanism under a different name predates Christianity? What are your thoughts there?
I think that this is absolutely stealing from Christianity,
Okay. Okay.
and I have really no problem with it.
Yes. Okay.
But I think you make an important point, David, that you say that humanism even predated Christianity, because I really do think that that is correct. Christianity borrowed from uh, traditions and thought systems that existed when Christianity was founded or appeared
Uh huh. Uh
amongst
huh.
humans. And at the and this evolved in a context of traditions and points of view in its society that it was founded in. And at the same time, humanism as it exists in Western Europe, Northern Europe, United States has evolved from a cultural context. And for example, we I have been listening a lot to Tom Holland, for example, and his book Dominion, and it seems like he's surprised that secularism or atheism uh, comes from a Christian background. And this is the big finding, and all the Christian media has used very big headlines about this. Look
Yes.
at this atheist historian that has discovered Christianity and its reasons to create humanism. But this is not something new.
Right, right.
All human traditions exist in a context and is created in a context and it evolves in a context. And that means that when a secular thought system appears, is evolved in a Christian context, it will have Christian values or thought systems that is part of it. Some of it will evolve further away. Some of it will have experience smaller evolutions and it will be quite different. And some of it will be quite close and
Hmm.
quite similar. But this is not something new. This is basic cultural science.
Yes, yes.
So I'm not sure what the Christians that proposes this argument, because I hear it a lot as well in the Norwegian context. I'm not sure what their goal is of this. Do they want me to become a Christian just because some of my values and some of my ways to think is the same? Do they think that that will make me a Christian and that will make me realize that I was a Christian all along?
Yeah.
Because I'm not really sure of the end point of what they of this argument. I'm that makes me quite dumbfounded.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by it as well. I think the way I have been framing things of late, and I've stolen this from multiple people, but is that everything is secular, that human beings are the source of religious traditions. And so religious traditions themselves are secular as well. And that, just as you say, this is the normal cultural evolution that takes place when people are together over time. And that's just what happens.
We have traditions and they evolve
Exactly.
together.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I find like the argument that humanism has stolen from Christianity, it's almost like, well, that's my ball. I get to keep that and you don't get to play with it. There's almost that, kind of, I don't want to say childish, but, a way of saying that's ours and that's not yours in a way that just doesn't recognize the complexity of human culture.
And I think that that is a very good point. And to some degree, I think that this is a way for them to try to invalidate uh, my worldview on the basis that they had this part of this first. But at the same time, I think they should be rather proud of themselves
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
this means that their religion, their religious worldview, have succeeded to such a large degree that I, as a secular person, includes this part of their worldview as a part of my worldview, even though I don't believe in other parts of their worldview. And this is the same for the confirmation ceremonies, because a lot of Christians in Norway, or some, it's less every year, are angry that we use the word confirmations
Okay.
because this is a Christian word, they say. I would say that they stole it from the Roman Empire, so who steals from who?
Yes. Yeah.
But uh, they succeeded so much in making this tradition an integral part of the Norwegian culture. They should be really proud that we uses this word.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
It's more problematic that for us that we use this word really.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But Latin words, fortunately, have a lot of meanings in different ways. So we use it in the way to to strengthen the youth, not to confirm something. So
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Christian, are there some topics that I haven't asked about that you definitely wanted to bring up?
what I think is important to note is that you have seen the shift in the American religious framework, or the religious map. It has changed a lot during the last years. And to some degree, the American context is a few years behind on the how many religious people there are, how many non-religious people there are, because America is a more religious place than a
Yes.
lot of Europe.
Yes.
And in the Norwegian context, around 30% now says that they are a believing Christian,
Okay.
or that they believe in God. And even the Norwegian church's members say that it's around the same. So even within the church, a lot of people are reporting that they are non-believing,
Right.
which has given quite interesting rhetoric from the Norwegian state church of late, when they have been arguing that we do not place our members in A or B categories, and we value them as much, and they obviously want to belong to the Christianity because, well, they are members even though they do not need to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this change in the religious landscape means that I felt that I grew up in a quite normal religious home when I grew up, as I said in the beginning. And at the same time, I think that my children, or not my children, it's hard to use the president of the Norwegian Humanist Association as an example, as a part of a normal Norwegian religious family.
Okay. Okay.
But the Norwegian normal family, would not participate a lot in the church community as of now, because, and this is a trend that I heard on the religious podcast as well, as Unbelievable, that some one generation goes a lot to church, and then the next just goes to church some important dates during the year, and then the next generation even less. And I think this has happened a lot in Norway. So at the moment, I would really believe that young families is not even Christmas Christians. They are rather secular, and that is quite a huge shift in these 30, 40 years where I have been alive, and that is quite interesting.
Yes, in the United States, and I don't have the statistics right off the top of my head, but the people who select none of the above, nuns, Nones, are becoming the largest block of life stance, let's say, people in the United States, which is quite a transformation from previous eras. And so I think we're definitely looking at Europe and the UK for the secularization process that you all have been through for some time now, almost for guidance as we try to figure out what does this look like within what was formerly a very religious culture.
But what is quite interesting for the American situation is this notion that, or the belief that, no politician will ever get into office as an atheist or a secular person, or it will just be from some liberal
Yeah.
districts. And this is quite strange for me as a Norwegian to hear about, because we had our first more or less openly atheist prime minister in the 50s.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is not something new. And he was buried in the same place, or his ceremony for his funeral was in the same place as I conducted the funeral I conducted,
Okay.
in the town hall of the capital. And this was, I'm not sure if anybody fussed a lot about that he had a non-religious funeral service, even though this was in the mid 80s.
Yeah, I think for right now, I think there are many non-religious politicians, but they have to hide. So just a very small handful will say that they are agnostic. I actually think that one of the ways forward for us is to have a more formal sense of a humanist
presence.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. For the politicians to be able to say, because when an American hears atheist, they hear God hater, immoral, nihilist. And so I think a way forward is for politicians to say, I am a humanist. I have an ethical stance. I care about people. And that might be for the future, a way for more secular politicians to hold their ground and still be able to be elected.
And that is probably the reasons why you have a Graceful Atheist
Yeah.
podcast.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the podcast started because I just needed somebody to talk to. I was feeling pretty lonely. So, yeah.
But at the same time, to show that you can be a moral human being that makes good decisions and care for, well, your neighbor,
Yes. Yeah.
is an important part of establishing that this is a possibility that, well, does not seem to exist in America at the moment for politicians.
Exactly.
So I think that what you do with highlighting the graceful ways to be an atheist is important.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Christian, can you tell us how people can learn more about the Norwegian Humanist? I keep saying the wrong thing. It's not society. It's
Association.
association. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's not that important.
And more about you. How can they find you?
If they want to learn more about the Norwegian Humanist Association, they can visit our webpage, and it's quite easy in English. It's the most easy. It's human.no, so human.norway.
Fantastic. Okay.
So that is the easy way to find the Norwegian Humanist Association. And you would have to scroll all the way to the bottom of the page and choose English.
Okay.
Because that is not that easily accessible.
Actually, I was looking at it today in Chrome, and it'll just translate it for you, and it does a pretty decent job at that also.
And the best thing about that is that you can read all the Norwegian pages, which there's a lot of more Norwegian pages than English pages on this webpage. So
Okay.
You will learn more actually if you visit it with the automatic translation than just visiting the English page.
We'll definitely have that in the show notes. Christian, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was a lot of fun. I always find it fascinating to compare culture. There's lots of similarities even and some differences. And I think that we all learn from that process. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Final thoughts on the episode. Christian was a fascinating person to speak with. Not only is he studying religion from a teaching, didactic, scientific point of view, but also the president of the largest humanist association in the world in Norway. And what Norway is doing is absolutely amazing, that they are focusing on the human needs for community, to have ritual in your life, and give people the opportunities to act out their philosophical life stance. I appreciate so much talking with Christian and hearing a different perspective, the European perspective, that is definitely different than the United States, but also having very common ideas, the need for the separation of church and state, for both the good of the state and the good of the church. And I find it fascinating that Christian is focused on the rights of religious people, including the politicians. And I think this is maybe what evangelical Christians don't get the most, is that pluralism and secularism is actually good for everyone involved. I believe that history proves that out. What evangelical Christians see as taking away something like school prayer, it doesn't occur to them that if you wanted to come and have a Wiccan ceremony or satanic temple ceremony, that would be difficult for them to swallow within a school. But by separating church and state, everyone is more free. I want to thank Christian for being on the podcast, for telling his story, his personal story, as well as the Norwegian story, giving us a glimpse into what a more secular society can be like. one that embraces the rights of religious people and non-religious people and gives them the opportunities to live out their philosophical life stance. Thank you, Christian, so much for being on the podcast. The Secular Grace Thought of the Week, inspired by Christian, is about the human need for ritual. Two of my favorite books are Kristen Osment's Grace Without God and Sasha Sagan's For Small Creatures Such as We. In both books, both women make the argument that human beings need to come together and physically act things out about their beliefs, about their philosophies, about their life stances, to use Christian's term. Sasha makes this explicit about births, coming of age, marriages, deaths, and the marking of time, things like birthdays. All of these things are really deeply important to us as human beings. And because they have almost always been wrapped up in religious tradition, on this side of deconversion, we can sometimes feel like they no longer apply to us. Or as Jennifer Michael Hecht coined in The Wonder Paradox, drop by and lie. In other words, we sometimes find ourselves at funerals and weddings that are religious, and yet we feel deeply uncomfortable. What all three of these authors suggest for us to do is to create our own traditions, to reinterpret existing traditions, to make rituals in our lives that are meaningful to us. And I love the way that Christian talks about this, our philosophical life stance. Or again, to use Jennifer Michael Hecht's terminology, a graceful life philosophy. Or in my words, secular grace. Next week, Arlene interviews Kyler. That'll be a great conversation. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network.